Over the years, I've produced a good number of videos showing you how to use the photographer's ephemeris, how to leverage the different features and functions to understand the light, sun, moon, stars, etc. But I've never really spent any time talking about the idea for the tool and what it's intended to accomplish. So I thought it might be interesting to look through some photographs and explain, without playing with software, just explain why you might want to use a tool like TPE in your photography planning. This first photo I'm showing you was taken on 15th of March 2008, and it was taken in Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado on a workshop with Glenn Randall, a landscape photographer from here in Boulder. And Glenn's workshop really was the origin for the idea for TPE. He asked us all to come along for a classroom session the previous evening with a topographic map, a ruler, protractor, calculator, pencil, paper, and explain to us how to understand not so much the timing of sunrise or sunset, but the angle of the light and the angle of the terrain, so that we'd have a better idea of where might be a successful location for the given time of year. And this location, Dream Lake, works particularly well in this time in March, because as you can see, despite the blowing snow and the haze that we had that morning, the light really hits the peaks directly up this valley, this glacial valley. And so it's got a good alignment for the light at that time of year. So that really was the original thought. Well, rather than doing this pencil and paper, why don't we use a computer and digital maps, Google Maps originally, to help answer some of these questions around what can we see when in terms of the light. A few months later, it seems I still hadn't learned my lesson. This is November 2011, and it's taken very early in the morning at, well, not that early actually, about 10 to 9 I think, at the Lough again in Rocky Mountain National Park. But as you can see, there's no direct light hitting pretty much anything that's worth photographing at this time of year. I should have known better, but of course I didn't do the planning, didn't apply the lessons that I'd learned. And there we are. We had a big long hike, a very early start, and nothing to show for it. Here's me looking at the scene, looking rather forlorn at the lack of anything nice to photograph. A while later, having given it a bit more thought, having worked on TPE and used the tool appropriately to check the angle of the light, to check the elevation of the sun and where it might strike, when you come back in middle of June, this was Midsummer Day morning, so this was very early, 5:30 in the morning, you see the light illuminates very nicely. It wasn't the best, it's not the best composition, it's not by any means a great photograph, but you can certainly see that the light is looking rather spectacular this time of day. So that's really, in the broadest sense, the rationale for using TP is you're an outdoor photographer, maybe a landscape photographer. You want to understand, when I go to this location, where are the places that might work better than others, or for this particular shot, when is the best time of year to go there? So let's look at a few more examples, just to give you a sense of the impact of direction of light. Here again is Dream Lake on a clearer morning, but this is later in October, and you can see that we're there at sunrise, we're there at the right time of day, but the angle, the sun is rising farther to the south, and so the light is blocked. It's blocked by higher terrain to the south of this valley, to the left of the camera. And so you get some nice light, but it's really not as spectacular as it would be at other times of year. Another famous example, a location I'm sure you've all seen before, Mesa Arch in Canyonlands National Park in Utah. This was taken on the 10th of June, and obviously June is when the sun is tending to rise at its most northerly declination, and indeed I placed the sun here in the corner of the arch, doing a sunstar effect, and it works okay. It's not bad. The HDR processing on this is far from ideal, I would say, looking at it after a number of years, but you get the idea. you can see, looking through the arch, the Lough Mountains over there on the horizon. And you can imagine that at different times of year, let's say I'd come in March, chances are the sun is going to rise directly behind the Lassalles, which means it's going to take a few minutes before it rises above them and hits the wall beneath the arch, which bounces the light up. When you wait until later after sunset, the quality of the light is not as nice. It's less yellow, it's harsher. And so you can also imagine that maybe coming at a different time of year, maybe winter, would give us even better light. Well, here we go. This is New Year's Day, 2009. So the sun is pretty much rising as far south as it's going to, more or less, or a week or so apart. And you can see the intensity of the colour bouncing up onto the underside of the arch at this time of year. So again, thinking through timing of your visit to some of these locations, it's not as if everybody has an opportunity to go there whenever they want. Often these trips take a lot of planning. People are short on time and short on vacation, and it costs money to get there. So you really want to make sure that you're getting there at the best time for the photograph that you would like to achieve. This was another shot on the same trip. This is Independence Monument in Colorado National Monument it's in the west of Colorado near Grand Junction, and you can see that just getting a sense of where and when the light is going to strike lets you know that yes, there could be some interesting morning shots at this location. Delcate Arch. This is again in Utah, Arches National Park, famous icon. But to get the sun setting directly onto this view of the arch with the Lassalles framed behind it, it only happens really at a couple of times in the year, and probably only happens once a year if you want snow on the peaks behind. So again, this is the sort of alignment you can check with a tool like TPE. One more example, Balanced Rock in also in Arches National Park. Again, this is a little bit later, it's May. You have a bit more flexibility here, but you can see that this is not necessarily a morning shot. It's very clearly, something you're going to have to take late afternoon, early evening. This is a place called Forresters Beach in New South Wales, Australia. Some very nice rock formations, so if you enjoy making seascapes, it's a great place to go. But if you want to catch the light on this ledge in the morning, again, that's not something you're necessarily going to do at the height of summer. You need that sun to be rising farther to the left, to the north. So worth checking out how the sun alignment varies. Again, southern hemisphere location, so things are different to what most of us from the northern hemisphere are used to. This is Hadrian's Wall in Northumberland in England, and this was taken in late March, and this rock formation, this is called near a place called Steel Rig and Crag, Lough, I think it's called, and the wall is facing to the north, so to the left of the camera is north, to the right is south, and you need the sun to be setting to the north of the wall in order for it to light in this manner. If you came in the dead of winter at sunset, the sun will not light this area at all. So another thing to explore. A couple more examples. Macey Lakes in Colorado. This was taken in July. You can see there's lots of varied terrain, and you can see also that the mountain to the left, which I think is called Colony Boulder, if I remember rightly, somewhat blocks the light. You probably want to have an explore and see if you're going to make the effort to get up here. This is Upper Macey Lake. It's at about 11,500 feet. It's a good 7-8 mile hike in there and 2,000 to 3,000 feet elevation gain. So worth planning for, so that you can get the sunrise that you want. Another example, this is looking down from Blue Lakes Pass in the San Juans in southwest Colorado. This is taken early August, you can see the shadow of Mount Sneffels, just being cast sort of direct center in the photograph. So there's lots of interesting angles of light you can get in this location. There are only certain times of year that you may be able to get up here, depending on the weather and snow conditions and your appetite for adventure, I guess. So again, varied terrain like this it really is worth exploring. Maybe you want to use a tool like TPE 3D for a location like this, which really gives you a sense of how the topography varies and lets you very quickly understand how the light will vary. Yosemite, another place that provides some fantastic compositions, but the light you can get on certain locations can be very specific. The best known example is probably Horseshoe Falls. That's not what this photograph is, but that only really happens, I think, about a week ago. This is, 23rd February, so yeah, it's sort of mid-February when that happens. Zion National Park, Utah, sunrise location. You can get a sense of what's possible here with TPE, and if you like, maybe lining up. You see the shadow of the peak behind me, or behind the camera in the shot is sort of aligned with the center of this composition. Those are the sort of things that you could plan for if you wanted to. Getting the sun setting directly behind Horseshoe Bend. This is near Page, Arizona. Famous location. You can see why that spectacular river carving its way around there. But the sun only is going to set in this sort of alignment at certain times of year. So that's something you can explore. One last example. This is Chasm Lake. The high peak that you're looking at is Long's Peak. It's one of the 14,000 foot mountains here in Colorado. And again, only at certain times of year will that east face be lit as it is here. And so it's an effort to get up here, especially for dawn. So again, worth planning for. Beyond the sun, twilight is provides you with some unique lighting conditions, and so knowing the twilight times and knowing the direction of the twilight light, so even though the sun is set, the light is still somewhat directional in terms of the brightest part of the sky or where any of the light will be cast on the landscape. That's worth exploring. This is Monument Valley in early April during nautical twilight. The moon is, of course, a very popular subject for photographers nowadays. The simplest question you might ask of the moon is when will it be at a certain phase? This is the last quarter moon, and it's a good time if you want to do telephoto work or telescope work on the moon, where you can see the side-lit craters, which you can see somewhat in this shot. This is only taken with a 300mm lens, so it's not particularly strong in terms of the zoom level. You can do a lot better, I suspect, with better equipment, but even with 300mm you can get a good sense of some of the detail on the moon. If you want a new moon, that's something you want to time. The visibility of the new moon is not as obvious as you think. Just because it's the day of new moon doesn't mean you'll see it. You probably won't see it until 1, 2, or even 3 days later, depending on where you are on the globe and depending on the particular lunar cycle that you're considering. So TP can tell you about that. Of course, putting the moon against the landscape is something people very much like to do. This was an attempt at getting the full moon during twilight next to the place called the Pawnee Buttes in northeast Colorado. It's again a bit of a journey out there, so worth checking when you want to go if you want to try this sort of shot. I don't think this one's particularly successful, but you can see the intention. Another moon in the landscape. This is at Castle Rigg Stone Circle in the Lake District in northern England in winter, and knowing that the moon is going to be hanging in the sky during this nice pink twilight time gives you some interesting options. That's only happens on certain days. This is the wreck of the SS Dickey on a place called Dickey Beach in Queensland, Australia. We've got a moon hanging in the sky. This is after sunset, so it's sort of later on in the evening, a long exposure shot. So it's not so much that the specific phase and specific direction and height of the moon matters so much. There's a lot of variance we could have had in this composition and still get this sort of effect, but it gives you a sense of possibility if you have an understanding of where and when the moon is going to be in the sky for when you go to take this shot. Sydney Opera House during a partial lunar eclipse, another example of where the eclipse phase lasts, relatively short amount of time, probably an hour and a half, something like that. And so you're somewhat constrained by where the moon is going to be aligned or what you can line it up with during the eclipse at all. So this was one of the options that came to mind, having explored the geometry of this particular eclipse. This next shot, this is up north of Boulder here in Colorado, and I had this idea of making sort of a trio with these two satellite dishes plus the moon. And this was the first attempt, which I thought, well, maybe let's try it during a full moon, and maybe that will look good. But as you can see, it looks a bit blown out. The landscape's still washed out because there's too much light on it. But I was able to work out when to go onto this location to have the moon pretty much in the right position to take the shot. So the alignment is good, but the lighting's not terribly successful, I think. I went back a few months later to try this with a new moon. Here's that one, which I think works a lot better, particularly as the crescent of the new moon at this particular time almost mimics the shape of the satellite dishes. But you can see that with a bit of, if you have a concept, it's something you can explore with TPE, work out timing options, and if you're able to get back to the location, make a few attempts or experiments to see what's going to work the best. Of course, lunar eclipses, a very popular subject. This is a sequence, so knowing the timing and the rough placement in the sky of the moon is important for these sort of shots. But you also might want to know where you can place a fully eclipsed moon versus the landscape. This is again not a great shot, but you see the moon, the eclipsed moon setting over near the Flatiron south of Boulder. And finally, this was taken down in Denver near the Colorado State Capitol, with the moon hanging between the dome and the flagpole. Night photography is, of course, hugely popular nowadays with the capabilities of digital cameras in low light conditions. This was one of the first attempts, and what's interesting about this, not so much that it's a great night photograph, but it shows you how you might want to think about what's the phase of the moon, how bright is the moon, will it cast some light on the landscape without making it so bright that you can't capture the stars as well, or without needing to do a lot of blending. This is a single exposure, showing some of the stars in Castle Valley near Moab in Utah. You might want to work out where some of the key constellations or asterisms, as they're called, might be in the sky. This is Orion, probably one of the very best known ones, taken on that same evening in Castle Valley. You can see there's a little bit of cloud there and a little bit of moonlight catching on that. But with TPE on iOS, you can explore exactly where the major stars and asterisms are going to be in the sky at any given time. And of course the Milky Way and meteor showers. You can see one fleeting Perseid meteor passing through this shot towards the top there. This is Rocky Mountain National Park. You can explore in the iOS app when the major meteor showers are going to occur, and you can visualize where the Milky Way is going to be aligned, where the band is, its angle relative to the landscape, etc. And of course, events like total solar eclipse. There's in our iOS app, we have a total eclipse magnitude indicator, so you can see exactly the magnitude of any eclipse going forward, any solar eclipse, and work out timings, angles, directions, etc. So there's lots of specific stuff you can do with TPE. For me, I think one of the things I hope the app achieves is not necessarily just telling you about very specific events and very specific alignments, but giving you a much broader sense of possibility in terms of natural light. Giving you a sense of how the light will evolve, maybe during a trip. So not just it's going to be sunset at 7:57 p.m. at an azimuth of 273.1 degree. Okay, that's great, but generally, when you're out making landscape photographs, there are more opportunities than you may have identified in your planning process, and I think it's important to stay open to those and aware of those, and having a general sense of how the light will evolve, how it will change, I think can maybe let you maximize those opportunities. This is maybe an example of that. This was in Iceland a couple of years ago, and it was pretty much cloudy the whole way over there, so we weren't expecting much to happen in terms of light. But we had a sense of where and when the sun would be setting, where it would be blocked, what might be lit, what might not be lit. And so this little glimpse of last light on the mountain with a little bit of snow that had just fallen, it's more of a gentle sort of landscape. It's not this strong directional light that I've showed you in many of the shots earlier in this little video. But I think it's the sort of thing that didn't need a ton of specific planning, but just having that awareness of where the light was going to be lets you get yourself into position to make the most of these opportunities that aren't necessarily always totally predictable. So I hope that's given you something of a sense of the thinking behind TPE and other tools like it, and how you might be able to incorporate them into your own photography planning. Feel free to drop us a line, support@photoephemeris.com, with your thoughts, comments, questions, suggestions. It's always great to hear from folks who are out there in the field practicing photography and using the tools. And thanks for watching.